Something is wrong in Formula One. Not wrong like a bad call from a steward. Not wrong like a controversial penalty. Wrong like, how does one team suddenly find half a second per lap that nobody else can find? Wrong like, how does a 19-year-old kid in his first full season win 3 races in a row against the most experienced drivers on the planet? Because here's what happened. Mercedes arrived in Australia with a new car, a new engine, and a teenager behind the wheel. And they didn't just win, they dominated. Australia, gone. China, gone. Japan, gone. 3 from 3. The margins weren't close. They weren't lucky. They were simply faster. So today, we're going to ask the question everyone in the paddock is whispering, but nobody wants to say out loud. Did Mercedes find a loophole? And if they did, is it cheating or is it genius? To understand what Mercedes might have done, you need to understand what changed in 2026. Because this wasn't a normal regulation update. This was the biggest technical reset in Formula One history. New aerodynamics, new chassis, and most critically, a completely new power unit formula. For the first time ever, the electrical component of the hybrid system is equally as powerful as the combustion engine. 50% of the power comes from fuel. 50% comes from electricity. That's not evolution, that's revolution. Under the new rules, teams can deploy up to 350 kilowatts from the MGU-K alone. That's 469 horsepower just from the electric motor, on top of a combustion engine producing similar levels. Total output, somewhere around 1,000 horsepower. But here's the thing, it's not just about how much power you have, it's about when you deploy it and how. And that's where Mercedes may have done something nobody else thought of. Let me introduce you to a concept called super clipping. To understand it, you first need to understand regular clipping. Every Formula One power unit has a ceiling. When the combustion engine and the electrical deployment both hit their maximum, the car clips. It stops accelerating and simply holds speed, like a rev limiter, but for the entire power system. In 2026, with massively increased electrical power, clipping happens more often, earlier, harder. Teams are deploying too much energy, too fast, and hitting the ceiling before they've even reached the fastest part of the straight. Red Bull struggled with this through pre-season. Ferrari admitted it was a problem. McLaren found themselves losing time in the final third of every straight because of it. Mercedes appeared to have no such problem. And that sent engineers at rival teams to their laptops at 2 in the morning, running data, asking each other the same question: how? The answer, or the suspected answer, lies in something the regulations don't explicitly prohibit. Normally, the MGU-K has 2 modes. It harvests energy under braking, or it deploys energy under acceleration. Simple. Super clipping suggests Mercedes found a 3rd mode. A mode where, at full throttle, the MGU-K briefly operates in reverse, not deploying energy forward, not harvesting, but using a small portion of stored electrical energy to resist the drivetrain, to act as a controlled brake on total power output. Why would you ever want to reduce your own power? Because of what it lets you do with the combustion engine. If the MGU-K can artificially manage the total power delivery, absorbing the excess before the system hits its ceiling, you can push the combustion engine harder, for longer, in a more linear way. The plateau never happens. While every other team on the grid is flatlining at the top of the straight, Mercedes is still pulling. The energy cost? Minimal. The system recycles much of what it absorbs back into the battery in real time. The net loss is small. The net gain in lap time is enormous. And here's what should keep FIA delegates awake at night. None of this explicitly violates the 2026 regulations. The rules define what the MGU-K can do. They define deployment limits and harvesting protocols. But they do not, in sufficiently specific language, prohibit what the MGU-K does in a scenario nobody imagined. Nobody imagined a team would deliberately run their electric motor in reverse under full power. Nobody except Mercedes. Now, there are 2 ways to read this. Interpretation 1. This is cheating. A team found a regulatory gap, exploited an oversight, and gained an advantage over competitors who played by the spirit of the rules. Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren. They all have a legitimate grievance. Interpretation 2. This is genius. And Formula One has always been this. Brabham's fan car, the Braun GP double diffuser, McLaren's brake steer. The history of this sport is the history of teams finding what the regulations allow, not just what they intended. The uncomfortable truth is that these two interpretations are not mutually exclusive. Something can be simultaneously genius and a loophole. And Formula One's history is full of moments where the FIA had to decide which side of that line a team had crossed. Let's talk about the number that's been circulating in engineering circles since Australia. 400 kilojoules. That is the estimated additional energy Mercedes appears to be able to utilize per lap compared to their closest rivals. 400 kilojoules isn't a measurement error. In the context of a Formula One lap, it is a staggering number. Red Bull ran their own post-race analysis after Australia. Their engine was performing exactly as expected. Their harvesting numbers were accurate. Their deployment profiles matched their simulations. Everything added up. Everything except the gap to Mercedes. Ferrari found the same thing after China. 3 weeks of intensive analysis, incremental differences found here and there. Nothing that explained the full picture. 400 kilojoules per lap, across a race distance, across a season. That's not finding a tenth of a second. That's operating in a different formula. You cannot discuss this without talking about the 19-year-old making it look easy. KimiAntonelli was always considered a generational talent. Ferrari wanted him. Red Bull tracked him for years, but Mercedes made the move nobody expected, naming him as Lewis Hamilton's replacement and backing that decision all the way into 2026. The criticism was immediate. You can't put a teenager in a Mercedes. You can't replace a 7-time world champion with someone who hasn't completed a full season in Formula 2. For much of 2025, the critics had ammunition. Antonelli was quick but raw, brilliant but unfinished. Then came 2026. In Japan, a circuit that punishes any loss of precision, where the walls are close and the curbs are violent. Antonelli drove with a calm that veteran commentators struggled to describe, managing tires, gap, energy deployment with the composure of someone who has been doing this for a decade. Is that the car? Is superclipping giving him so much power headroom that the races simply aren't as difficult for him as they are for everyone else? Or was the talent always there, waiting for a car that let it breathe? Probably both. But the car is doing more than most people want to admit. The FIA are aware. They always are. The intelligence network in Formula One is extraordinary. Engineers talk, data circulates carefully, and technical delegates pick up on anomalies faster than most people realize. What the FIA have not done, at least not publicly, is open a formal investigation into Mercedes's power unit. No technical directive clarifying MGU-K operation in the specific scenario superclipping describes. No confirmation of a review, which could mean several things. They looked at the data and found nothing that violates the regulations, in which case superclipping is legal and rival teams need to find it themselves. Or they found exactly what everyone suspected, looked at the regulatory language and realized Mercedes are entirely within the rules. That any directive issued now would constitute a mid-season rule change, which opens a door that's very hard to close and sets a precedent that reaches far beyond 2026. Here's the hardest question, the one that cuts to the core of what Formula One actually is. If Mercedes found superclipping, if their engineers sat in Brackley at some point in 2024, stared at the regulatory documents and saw something nobody else saw, does that deserve a championship or a disqualification? Think about what finding that actually requires. You read the regulations in a way their authors didn't intend. You run simulations on a concept never tested on a racing car. You design your entire power unit, hundreds of millions of euros, 5 years of development, around this concept. You convince your technical directors, your engine specialists, your legal team that the interpretation holds. Then you build it, and it has to work. That is not a casual loophole. That is a team outthinking every other organization in the sport across multiple years, multiple departments, on a conceptual level most engineers would never approach. Is it fair? Maybe not. Does it change the nature of competition for everyone else? Absolutely. But is it Formula One? In the most fundamental historical sense of what this sport has always been? Yes, completely. 3 races in. Mercedes are in a position nobody predicted and nobody fully understands. A teenager winning championship rounds with authority. A power unit producing more usable energy than anything else on the grid. And a team principal who has never, in his entire career, done anything without knowing exactly why. The secret will come out. In this sport, it always does. The data is too available, the engineers are too smart, the competitive pressure is too intense. Either a rival team finds what Mercedes found, and superclipping becomes the new standard, or the FIA closes it mid-season, and we have a completely different championship in the second half of the year. But underneath all of that, the question Formula One has been asking itself for 70 years remains unanswered. Where does innovation end and exploitation begin? Is a loophole a cheat if nobody wrote a rule to close it? Is an advantage illegitimate if finding it required more intelligence, more investment, and more courage than any rival was willing to commit? The sport has never answered that consistently. Teams penalized for exploitation in one era were celebrated for innovation in another. Mercedes may have found that space in 2026. Whether they're allowed to keep it is a different question entirely. But when the history of this season is written, when people look back at 2026 the way we look back at Brawn GP, the way we look back at the Mercedes hybrid era, they will ask what everyone is asking right now. How did they do it? And the answer, like always in this sport, will be both simpler and more complicated than anyone expected.